So I kind of got to thinking about how we would use the portal if we were operating our own program here. And I kind of got to get this idea for this segment of what are the rules for success from where we're sitting to most effectively optimize the portal. And I want to give this disclaimer. There is nuance and context to every single situation that provides an exception to the rule, right? Like no rule is just black and white. Every rule has some wiggle room. But with that being said, I think there's a couple of rules here that are just good landmarks to live by when it comes to how you utilize the talent acquisition mechanism that is the transfer portal. The transfer portal, this is the first rule, should be used as a side dish and not the meal. Okay? We want to live, if we're a successful college football program, at the high school level when it comes to adding talent for a number of reasons, but the most important is because we want to have the most solid foundation from top to bottom of guys that we're developing, guys that we're developing relationships with, guys that we're helping add to our culture and being solid throughout, guys that we're keeping on our roster for a number of years. We don't want to have to go to the portal every single offseason and add 20-plus guys so we can have a good football team the next year. Continuity is extremely underrated in college football, and the transfer portal obviously is not a tool that provides more continuity. It can help your football team, but it's not really the way that you want to live long-term when it comes to success at the highest level. We haven't seen it yet. It might happen in the future. We have not yet seen a team transfer portal in an entire roster and be able to go win a national championship in the next couple of years. We're watching Lane Kiffin with how that works. We're watching Louisville with how that works. We're watching Colorado very closely, and that's kind of the exception here. Like, we use this metaphor of, well, you don't want to just eat your side dish. You want to make sure you have an actual meal to go with it, right? But if you're starving, man, like I was in the office yesterday, forgot my lunch at home, and there's that little jar of Oreos we have in the kitchen, and I'm like 2 o'clock. It's starving. I haven't eaten anything. And so I'm like, hey, man, like I'm starving. This desperate times call for desperate measures. So I go to the jar and I probably eat legitimately like probably double-digit Oreos. If you're down bad, if your roster is deprived and you're starving for talent, you got to do what you got to do sometimes, man. You got to use the portal to be successful and to give yourself a chance in that upcoming season. Not a great routine to have, though. If you're eating Oreos for every meal because you're starving, another conversation for another time. Here's just a good principle for life, and it applies directly to the transfer portal as well. Don't work with crazy people. Don't do it. Don't work with crazy people. Culture is too important, and also there is no shortcut to having a great football team. I don't care how talented he is. If he's crazy and he's going to be a detriment to your locker room, it might be time to reevaluate how talented he really is. And that doesn't just go for the player. I think it also goes for the agent. If you got an agent that's asking for a ridiculous number, it's like, okay, well, where are your priorities really at? Is it about football or is it about making a quick buck? And if this player thinks it's a good idea to associate with this agent, who, again, is crazy, we don't need him on our roster. Sometimes, like, the bet ain't worth the hand, if you catch my drift there. So that's just a good rule for life. Culture. We had Dan Lanning on this show during the offseason. We're still off-season, quote-unquote, but we had him on a few months ago, and he said, when I was a young coach, I thought that culture stuff was just sort of rah-rah. I thought it was just something that kind of sounded good. Thought it didn't really matter. Now, as I've become a head coach, I realize it's the only thing that does. Culture is important. Don't work with crazy people. Good rule for life. Next rule that we think is massive for success in the transfer portal: supply and demand dictate the market. Allocate your funds accordingly. Okay? For me, if I am in charge of my NIL piggy bank, I'm spending money on a couple of key positions. Quarterbacks, big boys in the trenches, offensive and defensive line. And this is a key one, that missing/final piece to our roster to achieve what we want to achieve. Like, if you are one tight end away from having a team that you think can win the conference and compete for a national championship, all right, let's pony up and let's find a way to get it done. But more often than not, it is not wise, more than likely, to be spending near $1 million on a tight end. Just probably not good sense, right? And I love tight ends. I think they're enormous assets to have in the pass game if you can work them in the right way. But more often than not, and I'm using tight ends as an example here, you should spend your money on what's going to have the highest value placed on it from the market. Right now, the big defensive linemen, the offensive linemen, those are massive, massive pieces. There's not that many of them in the portal. If you need one, go pay for one. But don't overpay for something that you could get at a lower price point in a different point during the season. season, I say college football calendar, that winter portal window, or maybe work with what you have on your roster and find a way to maximize that or in some ways compensate for that. Here's a big one we believe in, and we probably feel the strongest about this one out of all of our rules. Well, we feel pretty strong about don't work with crazy people. Here's one rule we feel pretty strong about. Don't take a starting quarterback for your football team in the spring transfer portal window. Now, same thing we said previously. Desperate times call for desperate measures. If you don't feel like y'all can score more than 14 points a game and your defense is abysmal and that's going to be the only way you have any way of even making a bowl game this upcoming season, let's talk about it. But more often than not, it is a losing effort to go to the transfer portal after you've had the most important 15 practices of your college football season and bring someone in to run the offense and be a leader of your football team. For the reasons I just mentioned, it's tough to get acclimated to a new scheme and a new playbook in that amount of time. It's also very difficult to be able to win over a locker room in that amount of time. Not saying it can't be done, but like you really build your culture and build your identity as a team, who your leaders are going to be, that is, during the hardest parts of your year, which the season is hard. Don't get it twisted. Leaders step up in that way too. But during spring football, where guys are dinged up, tired, battered, bruised, and winter conditioning, where you are more often than not throwing up your breakfast at 6 a.m. with everyone on your team. That's hard stuff. That's where leaders step up and show who the real alphas are. More often than not, you'd like your alpha to be your quarterback. So that's how we feel about it. Peyton Thorne and Casey Thompson, two guys that came in post-spring. And we even talked to Hugh Freeze about this. He's like, Peyton Thorne missed spring practice last year. It showed. I think he's going to have a much improved production this upcoming season, in large part because he got those spring practices this year. Casey Thompson, it's tough to evaluate because he got hurt, but during the small sample size we had for him, he didn't necessarily have the best start to his season at FAU, a guy who transferred from Nebraska to FAU after spring practice. So don't take a starting quarterback in that second portal window. Don't know if one in the hand is worth two in the bush. That's the phrase we're looking for there. Last one to get to here when it comes to our spring transfer portal rules, or our transfer portal rules period. Make sure that everyone in your house is fed before you go shopping. Make sure that you have a proper attention to your current roster before you go out in the portal and try and add this player and that player and this player and that player. Because what you'll find is, more often than not, these guys that have a really strong season that maybe didn't have as much NIL earnings the previous year, it's like, hey, I did well at my job. I would like a raise. Let's sit down with them in the exit meeting. It's probably going to be annoying to a lot of coaches, probably be annoying to a lot of individuals that oversee the NIL and the roster side of things, but it's very important that we keep the guys that are on this roster, that we want to keep on this roster. Let's give them what they're worth. Heck, let's give them more what they're worth, because continuity in itself, back to my point, continuity in college football is one of the most underrated factors for success. I truly believe that. You can have all the talent in the world, you can have the best coaches in the world, but if you don't put it together properly, what do you really have? Just a lot of pieces. Continuity is one of the most effective strategies, one of the most effective tools to putting that talent together, and quite honestly, to bringing in new talent and helping other guys get acclimated and get up to speed and having that culture solidified. So to review for you here, our transfer portal rules for success are: the transfer portal should be enjoyed as a side dish. It should not be the main course. If you're starving, you can have a couple of Oreos, but it shouldn't be what you live on every single day for lunch. Don't work with crazy people. Agents, players alike, it's not worth it. Protect the culture. Don't take a transfer portal quarterback to be your starter if you missed all of spring practice. Really difficult to win the locker room, really difficult to know the playbook. Also, supply and demand dictates the market. Let's make sure we're spending our money on things that are actually worth what we're spending them on, okay? If they're a missing piece, fine, but more often than not, let's be smart with our money here and spend it on quarterbacks and spend it on offensive and defensive linemen. Make sure everyone internally is happy before we go out and spend dollars on some new shiny toys that we can add to our offensive and defensive strategies. So let me know on Twitter and Instagram. This will be a fun one to hear from y'all. Let me know what your transfer portal rules are for success in your mind. Hey y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.